My name is Tim Stanley, and we're going to talk this evening about our native bees. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in the Adirondack Mountains, and I grew up as a child allergic to bees, and every time I got stung, I would swell up. And actually, today, I believe that it wasn't so much bees that were stinging me, but it was wasps and hornets. And I think wasps and hornets a lot of times give a bad name to bees, because bees actually function a lot differently than the wasp and hornet. So I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. I work at the Fresh Air Fund, Sharp Preservation, as an environmental educator, where we have 17,000 people come to the facility year-round. We do a lot of education programs for local schools. In addition to that, I'm the president of the New York State Outdoor Education Association, where it's a statewide organization for educators and things like that. And then as also continuing my education in the New York State Outdoor Education Association, we're really lifelong learners, and many of us are lifelong learners, and we're always curious about things. So I got involved in a Master Naturalist program through Cornell Cooperative Extension a few years ago. And also in my background, I have a degree in agriculture, and I grew up on farms and working with food. And today, as part of my job at the Fresh Air Fund, I actually have a small farm that we teach 3,000 inner city youth, kind of connect them to the land. We actually do talk to them a lot about pollinators and the importance of pollinators in our nutrition center, because 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we eat is really due to the work and result of pollinators. So we're going to really delve in here today, and I think you're all going to learn a lot of new things. I've done this talk at various places over the years, and I am continually learning too. And all of the photographs that you see in this program are actually photographs that I've taken because I found photographs is really a great vehicle to get out there and observe nature up close. And really the bees have taught me a lot about the flowers and the plants. And so I hope we'll learn a lot together tonight as we move forward. Now, we're all familiar with a variety of different pollinators. Bees are not the only pollinators out there. Sometimes I call them the intentional pollinators because of the way that bees are designed. And we'll get to that into a minute. But of course, we see, actually, I brought a pointer tonight. So we can point some of this stuff out. So here we have a wasp over here. We're all familiar with butterflies. And this is actually a weird looking little fly that actually looks kind of like a bee. It's called a big-headed fly. And here's an ant. And over here, of course, are fuzzy bees. And this is actually a bumblebee right there. And then tonight we're really going to focus, of all the pollinators, we're really going to focus on the bees. And really how, at the end of this, is how you can kind of help bees locally here in Beacon or wherever we are really from. And we're not talking about honeybees. All the bees that we're about to talk about tonight are going to live a whole different lifestyle from what we actually think that bees live. And we'll learn about, we'll just point out this. This is a blue Orchardbee right here. She's going into a beard tongue flower. And these are very fast-moving, interesting bees. And we're really going to get into each of these bees specifically in a few minutes. But bees are actually kind of evolved from wasps. Wasps are predatory. Wasps actually go after and eat other insects. They're predatory. So they're the wolves of the bee world. And they'll actually go and kill insects, whether it's a grasshopper or aphids. They're actually good in their own right. One reason we don't really particularly like wasps and hornets is because these predatory insects actually can be very aggressive. The bald-faced hornet that we see right here, that's actually a queen in the fall looking for a place to overwinter. She's actually going to be the only living representative of her species that's going to survive the wintertime. And here we have a paper wasp. And not only can they sting, but they can sting multiple times, and they're really defensive of their territories. Most bees are not. And so bees actually are vegetarians. They eat pollen from the flowers and drink the nectar. And that is their food source. And so bees evolve from eventually a wasp somewhere along the lineage decides that, oh, pollen is really good stuff, and it doesn't fight back, and I'm going to eat this instead of going and being a hunter. And so over time, bees sort of evolve to be these fuzzy insects. And let's take a look more specifically. This is a common eastern bumblebee, and she's flying over here to our jewelweed, a yellow jewelweed right here. But all bees are insects, of course, and they're in a group of insects called Hymenoptera, which includes an order of insects called Hymenoptera, which includes ants, includes wasps, sawflies, and bees. And the interesting thing about bees is Hymenoptera means membrane wing. They actually have 4 wings, where a fly only has 2 wings. Diptera, which means 2. And so they have 4 wings. Almost always, and in nature you'll always find this, there's an exception to every rule. Not every bee is fuzzy, but for the most part, most bees are fuzzy, because it's a great way to collect pollen and get pollen all over your body, because you're going to want to collect that and pack it down here inside of some little pollen baskets. Now, of course, not every bee is going to have pollen baskets either, but every bee is going to have a way to collect pollen as we delve into this world. If you're a bee, you're going to have a very long tongue. That's for sipping nectar. And depending on the type of bee you are, you might be adapted for flowers that are, you have a very long tongue, so a flower that has a very long stem in which to get in to drink the nectar. Some of you bees will have short tongues. So bees will have all different tongues. In fact, for bumblebees, some species of bumblebees will have long tongues, some will have short tongues, some will have medium-sized tongues. And that sort of evolved so that they kind of eliminated competition among each other. So the theory is. And we also have a stinger. If you're a female, you're going to have a stinger. That's an adaptation of the ovipositor and the egg-laying part of the female. And of course, females always are going to protect their young, no matter what you are in nature. And bees, of course, are no different. And so bees, like all insects, have 3 parts: a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And so all of these are keys if you ever get really into wanting to identify certain bees. It's important. The abdomen, especially in bumblebees, will be kind of important. So this is our bumblebee. Oh, bees also have a chewing mouth part too. Flies only have sucking mouth parts. Bees can drink and chew. And of course they have some big eyes and hairy bodies. This is the big key thing of our bees. And of course there's a flower and bee for every season. So we're going to pull all this together, how you, at the end, specifically how all of these things can really help you attract bees. And also, I think a secondary thing will be for us not to really be afraid of them. Because most bees actually won't sting you and can't sting you, and we'll find out why. And so here we have a bunch of different types of bees. You're starting to see already some of the diversity that we're going to talk about tonight. Small Carpenter Bee here. We have a couple different varieties of sweat bees, a large Carpenter Bee, and of course bumblebees. And what type of flowers are bees attracted to? Bees cannot see the color red. So they are not attracted to red flowers. Bees actually can see in ultraviolet light. And so bees are going to be attracted to white flowers, yellow, blue, flowers that have ultraviolet markers. Of course, we as humans can't see ultraviolet light. But there's actually ultraviolet markers that will actually be sort of like runways for bees to find their way down into the nectar source of the flowers. Bees typically are attracted to, they can smell, so they're attracted to flowers that have kind of a fresh, mild, and pleasant smell. And of course, usually a flower will have nectar. Now, not always, because remember, bees are after pollen, so if you're any other type of pollinator, you're really going to the flower because you want nectar. But if you're a bee, that's not necessarily the case. You're really going after the pollen. Some of our earliest spring flowers, some ephemerals like bloodroot that grows in the forest, has no nectar. It has no nectar because there's not a lot of other flowers out there to compete with. And so it doesn't need to waste its energy to produce nectar. And so they don't. While other ones will produce a lot of nectar when there's lots of flowers and things like that. And of course bees often like shallow landing platforms, tubular. If you want to attract butterflies, you really want red flowers. Long tubed flowers are going to attract things like red flowers, hummingbirds, and beetles and flies also. I don't know if you're all familiar with trillium. I learned this past year. I've been going around photographing the bees, and I come up to a beautiful trillium, a beautiful flower. You go up to no bees. There's flies there. You go up and you smell it. Trillium stinks. It's also a nickname known as Stinking Benjamin, as I came to find out. And so trilliums after the flies, jack in the pulpit, things like that. And of course, beetles are one of the more ancient pollinators, and they're just white and green flowers is all they want. So bees, like I said, can't see red, but they can see these ultraviolet markers. It's just plain old dandelion. So the whole world in which a bee sees is really, really different from the way that we see. The spectrum is shifted. They can really see the ultraviolet light. So red is not important. Honey. Why do we keep honeybees? We keep honeybees because honeybees produce honey, which we all love and want. But honeybees are non-native to North America. They came over with the Europeans, and of course they kind of spread ahead of the settlers, and the Native Americans often call them white man's stinging insect, because most native bees here in North America, the 4,000 bee species in North America, hardly any of them sting. So they weren't even familiar with this idea that bees sting. But if you have a hive, you're going to sting because you have invested all your resources into one place. And if that one place gets destroyed, that's it. You have nothing left. So you better protect it. You better defend it. And so honeybees surely do when they feel threatened. And why do they produce the honey? They produce the honey because the honey is the food that gets them through the long winters. None of our 4,000 native bees survive the winter in the adult form unless you're a queen bee, like a queen bumblebee. You're going to find a hiding place and you're going to hibernate. But none of them are actually physically active during the wintertime. And in fact, here I have a whole little mason box full of bees inside here, and I'm going to tell you how they actually live their life. And they're all full. This is full of bees right now, as we speak, just waiting for warm weather when it comes to free themselves and go about their business. So, yes, all the bees produce a honey-like substance, but since you're not living throughout the winter, you do not need to store it in large quantities. You just need enough to go from a little egg to an adult. And so a lot of the bees, native bees, make something called bee bread. They mix pollen and nectar together, or some variation of that. We do not need honeybees in North America to pollinate our flowers. In fact, honeybees are not even very good at pollinating North American flowers, such as the tomato plant. Almost every tomato that you've ever eaten is the work of a bumblebee. And they have a special technique for doing that. And so we certainly would have all of our crops if there were no honeybees. We also find that the honeybees don't really compete with our native bees, so they really kind of can all live together. So honeybees are not an invasive species. They're not really out-competing. Maybe the things that affect colony collapse disorder affect our native bees. So if we help honeybees, we'll help our native bees. If we help our native bees, we'll help honeybees, and everyone can get along and live together. But they really are worth a lot. 75% of the world's plants depend on pollinators of some variety, and they are economically really important. $20 billion in 2000 of insect pollinated crops in America. And $3 billion of that is attributed to native insects. But let's really focus in on our native pollen bees. We won't call them honeybees because, like I said, they don't store that honey, so they don't need that large quantity of honey to survive the wintertime. So here we have a nice little one of our native pollen bees on a sunflower. And so this summer when it warms up, you can go out and start observing some of these different varieties of bees. And like I said, 4,000 native bee species in the United States, 477 species here in New York, 47 genera. 6 of the 7 bee families live in New York. So that's all of them that live in North America too. 6 of the 7 families. The 7th family of bees is only found in Australia. So that's the only other place the 7th family is found. And they have a very small range. So your backyard is their home. Maybe 200 yards to a mile would be the maximum distance that most bees could actually fly. So your backyard may be the whole world to these little bees. And so you can have a huge impact on on the diversity of bees in our area. Some bees are specialists. A specialist is a bee that will just go after one type of flower. And we're going to meet one of those bees in here tonight. It's called a squash bee. They only only go to squash flowers. Or maybe you only go to like sunflower-like flowers. Or maybe you're a generalist and you'll pollinate everything and you're active from early spring all the way to the fall. So as you are thinking about flowers and planting, it's important to have flowers, because right now as the bees will emerge as soon as it warms up in a few more weeks. And we'll meet some of those first bees that will emerge. And so you'll need flowers from early spring all the way to fall as you plant gardens, as you think about plants. And our native bees are more efficient pollinators. For example, 250 blue orchard bees, the ones that live in this little contraption here, 250, there's only about 7 in one of these tubes, 250 of them can do the same work as 2 hives of honeybees. And the blue orchard bee, you'll see why. Here's a honeybee just flying around. But the blue orchard bee is like, she's like all over the place. And she's fast. And I had the most difficulty taking a photograph of them. Like, it was just difficult. She's very fast, and they don't live for very long. They do their business, they lay their eggs, and then life's over for them. You won't see them by midsummer, the blue orchard bee. 250, so they're great if you are producing apples or flowers that bloom in early spring. Some bees, like native plants, like plants of the nightshade family, tomatoes, eggplants, all of these kind of flowers, they have to have a special pollination technique. The pollen has to be shaken out of them. So a bee will go on it, like a bumblebee, and they will literally sit there and vibrate their muscles. They don't move their wings. If you're in your garden in the morning, you can hear as they shake the pollen out of the flower. Honeybees evolved over in Europe, so they weren't here with plants of the nightshade family like tomatoes and things, or the heath family, blueberries. Blueberries are native pollinators. Buzz pollinate that. They shake the pollen right out of the flowers. Our native bees wake up early in the morning. They're active early in the morning. In fact, bumblebees can thermoregulate their bodies. They can actually create a little bit of heat by vibrating their wing muscles, and they can get started much earlier in the morning. Some of the bees sleep right in the flowers that they pollinate, so they're at work first thing in the morning. They don't have to leave a hive. They don't have to do anything. And the females will actually lay their eggs in the ground right beneath the flowers that they're pollinating. But what about this mystery of our bees? 70% of our native bees, of that 4,000 bees, will nest below your feet under the ground. Not to be confused with ground nesting hornets and wasps. Remember, the wasps and hornets are going to live, with wasps and hornets, where we have solitary bees and social bees, you also have solitary wasps and social wasps as well. Anything that's social, living in a group, is going to be more aggressive than something living solitary. So let's see how they live their lives. So we'll take the blue orchard bee, for example. It's hanging on a fence post, this little thing. There's tubes about 6 inches long. So along comes the female. She wakes up first thing in the spring. She's going around drinking nectar, collecting pollen. She's going to go to the end of this tube, and she's going to lay an egg. And she's going to lay the egg, and then she's going to go to a little pollen and a little nectar, mix it together, make some bee bread, and then she creates a mud petition, closes it off, lays another egg, provisions that egg, closes it off. So she's about 7 to 8 eggs laid. That is her life work. She's not going to sting. She has no reason to sting, because every female is an egg layer. So now you've spread all of this out across all the bees, so each single bee's work is not as important as a hive would be. So once they finish it off, they cap it off, her work is done, and she may actually, as a solitary bee, die. These will then mature in here. They'll be little eggs, and then they'll hatch the larvae, and then eventually they will go into metapupa and metamorphosize and turn into adult. And metamorphosis in itself is a really fascinating subject if you think about it. Not all insects go through complete metamorphosis, but imagine you go into a cocoon, your whole body literally melts, disintegrates, and that goo all comes back together in a puzzle and becomes something totally different. Metamorphosis. And so they've done that, and they metamorphosize during the summertime. They remain kind of in the cocoon as an adult, as a dormant adult, and then when the spring comes, they'll emerge out of these holes. Guess who gets to be on the outside of this tube? The males. Why do you think the males get to live on the outside? Or why would the female blue orchard bee lay her male eggs last while the female's deeper inside? Any idea? The males do emerge first. Okay. Males are expendable in nature because you don't need as many males for the females, and so having all the males, a bird comes along, eats the male, so what? There's another male there. Eats that male, so what? There's another male. Eats that male, there's another male, he might survive, then all the females, they're all protected. So out comes all the females, and a couple males, and the world's happy.
How does the queen bee know?
There's no queen bees in there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep. The female.
The female bee. How does she know that the egg is a male or a female?
That's an interesting question, but you go back to the honeybee hive, every male eggs do not need to be fertilized in bees. So only after the female has met up with a male and she lays a fertilized egg, so she'll lay the fertilized eggs first, and then the non-fertilized eggs will come after. So in the honeybees, they don't need to lay, males aren't fertilized eggs. I don't know how that works exactly, but that's what happens. So these are our solitary bees. So even if 30% of the solitary bees are going to live in holes in trees, like the blue orchard bee, and many others we're going to meet in a little while. I'm going to go into a few specific ones. And then the rest, 70%, live in holes underground. Lay their eggs, cap them off, and then their job is done. Many of these solitary bees actually live together, what's called an aggregation. Each one is solitary, but they kind of live together. So you might see a mining bee, and you'll see hundreds of them. And you'll think you have this big problem with bees. After they lay all their eggs, they're just going to go away. And number one and number two, their stingers actually can't even penetrate human skin, most of these solitary bees. So they couldn't even sting if they wanted to. And so this is our solitary bee. So what about our social bees? I actually had a little diagram so you can kind of, here it is, our bumblebee. And so the queen bumblebee, actually we're going to the social bee. So that was our solitary bee there. And we'll go to the queen bumblebee. Right now the queen bumblebees are all asleep. And they're hiding in a stone wall somewhere in some really dry space. And so when it warms up, you're going to see the queen bumblebees. They're larger than all the other bumblebees you're going to see in summertime. And so she's going to wake up, and then she has to do all the work to get her hive together. This is actually an artificial bumblebee house that we have here. Here's a bee. This is a honeybee. They actually don't make any bumblebee models or any other type, or any of the other 4,000, only honeybee model. So like, I do programs for kids too, so here you can actually physically show the membrane wings and the abdomen and the head and things like that. So what the queen bee is looking for, she's looking for a space to lay her eggs to create a nest. So this is, they only say 1 in 4 of these actually would attract a queen bumblebee. And you put in like just some shredded paper, hamster paper. But what they really love and look for, and where they actually will settle down, is old mouse nests full of mouse urine and things like that. They say a queen bumblebee would be very attracted to that. So she will go in here, and that's what they do. When they wake up in the spring, and I've seen these down at Franny Reese State Park pollinating the Dutchman breeches. And you watch them, they're out with the flowers. That bee is going in here, going in there. She's looking for the perfect place to raise her family, to start her colony, to start her hive. And so sometimes they might nest in a bumblebee box, which would be cool because I could get some pictures if she did. So I could take the roof off and see what was happening there. But what they create is little honey pots. She'll create a little honey pot and lay some eggs. Bumblebees do make honey. They put it into the honey pot. And then she'll feed the developing larvae, and then they'll pupate, and then they'll become adults. Once the first generation is born, we now have the worker bees. Now, the queen bee, she doesn't have to work as hard anymore. Though she always does work her whole life, where the honeybees, the queen will just lay eggs. This isn't so in the bumblebee world. She'll actually help and participate, go out and forage, and be very active outside. So she's much larger. So in the spring during apple blossom time, every bumblebee that you see is a queen bumblebee. It won't be till about maybe June that you actually start seeing some of the worker bees. And they're going to be smaller. They'll look a lot like her, but and then the life cycle kind of continues. Then towards the end of the fall, she's only going to lay females, which will become the next generation of queens, and males. And then the queens will become pregnant by the males, drones. And then the drones will die, all the workers will die, the old queen will die, and the new queens now go off and find a dry spot where they will hunker down for the winter time and emerge the following spring. So that's the life cycle of our social bee, the bumblebee, which is our only real social bee that we have. And all of our other bees are going to live like our mason bee in that whole cycle, lay her eggs, die, but some bees, solitary bees, actually have multiple generations and will live throughout the whole summer. And some kind of demonstrate social behavior. And so this is kind of all that we talked about here, kind of in a visual form. And we talked about bee stings, and just interesting thing, there's no documented case of anyone going into anaphylactic shock from a solitary bee sting. And solitary bee venom is different, and only small amounts are injected compared to even honeybees. So most of the time, all of this stinging and swelling is really wasp, yellow jackets. Yellow jackets are really a wasp. And wasps, of course, don't have hair on their bodies because they're predators, and they don't collect pollen. You will see wasps at flowers. They drink nectar, so you will see them there. So I want to just kind of spotlight, just to highlight a few of the native bees that you were going to find this spring in your garden. Of course, we're all familiar with the bumblebee. There's about 50 varieties of bumblebees in North America, and I found about 8 varieties here in New York so far. This is a queen bumblebee. This is a Franny Reese State Park over up in Poughkeepsie, and it's full of Dutchman breeches in the spring. You also see early spring in can't remember the name of the park, but it's up near Poughkeepsie. There's like trout lily. Fields of trout lily will track as one of our early plants that you're going to see first in the spring. And the queen bumblebee, so there she is out, and this one here is the one that I kind of just sat and watched, and I seen her go through some like stones looking for a place to actually create. And in my house, they're actually going underneath the steps looking for places, and I thought they were going to have a colony there, but I never did see them settle there permanently. We have a whole bunch of different varieties of bumblebees, and in fact, since they're kind of easy to see, you can actually take pictures of them, and if you're interested, you can submit them in a citizen science thing called bumblebeewatch.org, and you can actually submit your photograph, and it'll go through a dichotomous key, and you can identify your bumblebee, and they will confirm your identification on that website.
Can you repeat the website, please?
Bumblebeewatch.org. And at the end, I'll have all the references listed too for your reference. And so here we see 4 different varieties of bumblebees. Here in the Hudson Valley, we have a 2-spotted bumblebee. He has a little yellow back here. It looks like 2 spots right back here. This is a confusing bumblebee because each one, they're like yellow and fuzzy all over the place, and they kind of could be mistaken for other bumblebees, so it confuses people, I suppose. And here we have a half black bumblebee. Half of the abdomen is black, half of it is yellow. And here we have a rusty belted bumblebee right here. All of these are all from local bumblebees here in the Hudson Valley. And the common eastern bumblebee, which we saw flying earlier, is the one you most likely see. And then as you go up into the north country of New York, I was the only one to report this one, a northern amber bumblebee, which is near my parents' house. Here's a yellow banded bumblebee and a tricolored bumblebee, so they actually get kind of beautiful too if you see some of these. And I've seen the tricolored bumblebee up in the Catskills and up in the Adirondacks, different places like that. And this is a red banded bumblebee, almost looks like our tricolored bumblebee. But you can see the females all have the pollen there on their back legs right here. So they're collecting that pollen to take back. And we talked about the unique relationship between the flower and the bee. There's Bumblebee Watch. It's a citizen science thing. And here's an actual bumblebee. In the morning, you can listen to hear them shake the pollen right out of the tomato plants. And so next time you have a tomato, think of bumblebee. And this is talking about the buzz. It's called buzz pollination. Not only do bumblebees do it, but most of our native bees actually do the buzz pollination, where they hold on like this upside down and then they shake the pollen out, like shaking salt out of a salt shaker. This is one of the first bees you'll actually see in the spring. It's called a mining bee. This one here, actually, there's spring mining bees and there's fall mining bees. This is a fall mining bee. This was down near Fonsstock State Park, Hubbard Perkins Lodge. If you go to Hubbard Perkins Lodge, there's actually a flower garden right behind Hubbard Perkins, and it's filled with pollen. It's a pollinator garden. It's a fun place to kind of go and see. This is a little spring mining bee on garlic mustard. And they actually, the males will emerge first in the spring. You might see them on your crocuses, and they're really tiny. Just a tiny little insect, much smaller than maybe the size of a housefly, and they'll be out and about. Interesting, there are 400 species of these bees. It's one of the most common bees that you'll actually see, and hardly anybody ever sees them because we never really look for them. But they're everywhere. And 2 years ago, I didn't see any of these bees either. And now, I'm usually looking through my photographs from the past summer. I'm still discovering bees that I didn't even realize I was looking at. So, mining bees. And these aren't going to sting you. They live under the ground, and they lay their eggs, and then their work is done. Oops, I'm going backwards, hitting the wrong button here. This is an interesting bee called a cellophane bee. Creating habitat for bees. This is like a large dirt area where people actually dig up the dirt. And there was thousands of these cellophane bees here, and they actually look like their face has kind of a heart shape, 2 eyes that kind of come down to a point, and they all live under the ground. And they actually dig their own holes in the ground, like you can see her right here. And this was a large aggregation of bees. There was literally thousands of bees here, and I'm down photographing them, and the bees are really everywhere. But they don't pay any attention to me. I'm no threat to them, and they go about their work. The interesting thing about the cellophane bees is they actually create a plastic lining underground. So they can actually lay their eggs in wet areas. So if it's a heavy rainstorm, and it's impervious to that. And instead of the bee bread, they actually take pollen and nectar as kind of a liquid food. And then they lay their egg right there. The egg will hatch, and it will eat and drink this liquid and grow up into the adult bee. And then in the spring, that bee will emerge, and they'll be all over the place. So you might look like you have a bee infestation, and people tend to want to spray bees. They see a lot of them, but now that you have a little bit of knowledge about them, they'll be gone in a couple weeks, and they won't be a huge problem for you. Cellophane bees. Scientists are actually using this to it's called biomimicry, when we use nature to create products in our society, a biodegradable plastic bag. This actually will biodegrade within 5 years, this natural plastic created by bees. Now this is a yellow-faced bee. It's actually related to the cellophane bee, but what did I say about bees? They all have hair on them, right? I don't see any hair on that bee. First glance, it looks like a wasp. In nature, there's an exception to every rule. And yellow-faced bee, they have little yellow markings. They're all black, and they're very, very, very tiny. These are the flowers of Angelica. Parsley. They have all of these teeny tiny flowers, anything from the carrot family. They'll be attracted to, and the reason they go to little flowers because they're little bees. They have little tongues, so they need little flowers. So, and the big bees are going to be at other flowers. So they actually ingest the nectar inside of a crop and the pollen, and then they regurgitate it back when they get to their nest. So the little yellow-faced bee. Moving ahead here. And the largest bee of all, probably the most notorious beyond the bumblebees and the wasps, everybody is annoyed by the large carpenter bee. The large carpenter bee is the only bee that physically uses his jaws to drill a hole through wood. Now there's a few ways of preventing this. Painting wood surfaces is a deterrent to them, or heavy like waterproofing, varnishes, things like that. That will deter them. But if you do have them, know a little bit about them. They produce the largest egg in the bee world. They produce the fewest amount of young, only 2 or 3 young per female bee. So they reproduce very slowly. They use the same holes. So if you don't plug in the holes and things like that, they'll just recycle those. And they'll only create a few new ones each year. So they are very active. The male bees actually will come dive bomb you and act like they're going to defend their territory, and that's what they're doing. They'll hit heads, they'll knock each other on the ground, and they're all over the place. They're harmless, of course, because we know male bees can't sting. The females could, but again, they're very docile. And once they cap off their eggs, they fill in their holes, and then their work is done. And then that's why you don't see them later in the season. So if you can tolerate them, they are good pollinators. Well, actually, they're not the best pollinators. They're thieves, too. Because instead of going into the flower to get the pollen, they'll actually use their jaws and cut open the flower and steal the nectar. So they don't always do that, but once they get the hang of things, they do that.
What's the, I guess you call it, gestation period of the eggs? How long do they stay before they hatch? Just curious.
They'll lay them in the spring, and they stay in that hole and mature and remain dormant until the following year. There's only one generation of large carpenter bees each year.
So a lot of those can stop it in the house.
Yep. And then, so this is another thing you do. If you don't want them and they come out in the spring, you could just fill the holes in with wood putty or something like that so that they won't reuse them, and then paint the surfaces, because they'll, you know, if they were bothering you. Yep.
So do they have a preference for a type of plant?
No, they're generalists, so they will go to most types of flowers, usually a large flower so they can sustain their body weight. They love milkweed, they love you know, thistles and plants like that. So usually large flowers, you know, apple blossoms. And they'll be active all year, like from early spring. So they actually don't die after they lay their eggs. They actually just continue, you know, drinking nectar, enjoying the summer. So, interesting thing, large carpenter bees. This is how you tell them different from a bumblebee. They have no hair on their abdomen. They're hairless. Bumblebees always have hair on their abdomen. So that is one way you can tell them apart. Plus, they don't have a very hairy head. And most carpenter male bees will actually have a, inside you tell male bees, they'll have a white spot on the front of their head. We don't see that on this one because of the shot of this, but they'll have a white head. And they'll have a large, and there's only a very few species of large carpenter bees. But of course, if you have the world's biggest bee, or North America's biggest bee, interestingly enough, in the same grouping of bees, we have the smallest bee, one of the smallest bees, the small carpenter bee. And you can see this small carpenter bee, related to the large carpenter bee, actually has a white spot on it. This is a male. He has that white thing. This is, now I can't remember the name of the flower, wild geranium. So, wild geranium. And wild geranium is interesting because the pollen is blue. And so this is all the pollen, so the male pollen on the plants. The female part of this plant won't become receptive to all the blue pollen that's taken away. Now I always ask, why blue pollen? Does pollen taste different? Because others have yellow pollen. So maybe this is some way of attracting the bees to get attention from them. Maybe their pollen actually is more nutritious. And some pollen is more nutritious than other pollen, as it turns out. I don't know if the wild geranium actually has more nutritious pollen than another plant. I never figured that much out. But before the female part can produce a seed, all the pollen must be taken off of this plant first, then the female part will become receptive of the flower. So that's the little carbon. One of the very common pollinator on this. This is actually a springtime plant here. And you'll see these guys. Interesting thing. On these guys, I brought some more props to kind of show you. You all know this. Staghorn sumac. And they have hollow stems. So this little bee will actually find out sumac. And here it has broke off, and there's a hollow stem right in here. And so the bees, females, will actually find something like this and actually go in there and lay the egg within the stem of this flower. You could just pass that around and take a look. I don't know if there's anything in it. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. They call it a hibernaculum because this bee here, the female, she will live all year long. Her children will hatch, and she'll lay more eggs, and they'll help her. So we're starting to see the social behavior developing in these little bees. And she will actually sit in the hole and protect it. So we see the blue Orchardbee, she's not active at all, she dies. This little bee survives all year long and protects them. And then they'll hatch at the end of summer, and then they'll fly all around, and they'll look for a place to kind of spend the winter as adults. So they hibernate, basically. So So there's a lot of fascinating little things about the bee world. Now comes the sweat bees. Of course, the sweat bees are attracted to human sweat, hence they get their name. So human sweat has salt, which to some bees apparently is attractive. We're going to see 4 kinds of sweat bees. This one is called the green sweat bee. The green sweat bee is beautiful metallic green, has a striped abdomen. Of the sweat bees, this is the only one that's not attracted to human sweat. And there's actually 43 species of these in North America, and they're really beautiful. And I talked about how bees collect things. Bumblebees have pollen baskets they shove the pollen down into. These actually have scopia, which are just hairs on the hind leg. So they don't actually have pollen baskets, so they just kind of put the pollen here on their hind legs, and they'll brush it down, and that's how they'll carry the pollen. So we've seen one carries it inside, some carry them in a pollen basket, some carry them on their hairy legs on the back here. So, one other prop, and this one I'm not going to pass around because it's picky. If you want to help the small carpenter bee, they actually nest inside of the stems of blackberry, raspberries, wineberries. So if you have these in your yard, you can actually go snip off the ends of your blackberries and create habitat for the small carpenter bee. And of course, this is blackberry, has very strong thorns. So that's just one thing that you could do to help some of our native bees, creating habitats and things like that. So, so we have our small sweat bee here. She's carrying the bee. And this is Echinacea, a cone flower, which is a native plant, which is very attractive to these bees. Here we have another type of sweat bee. These are attracted to human sweat. This is all green. It's a metallic green sweat bee. It does not have a striped abdomen, and they're very active in the early spring. And there are so many different varieties of these, but they fundamentally, from our point, we can just call them all metallic green sweat bees. And they're active throughout the whole year too. Some of these bees actually show different levels of social behavior. Some will actually lay their eggs, and some actually have queen. I'm not sure if in New York, but some of these species actually have queens. Then we have this dark sweat bees. Here's a little one coming out of a flower. This flower actually has white pollen right here, and this is a dark sweat bee. So, and they're about all the same size, relatively small. And there's 10 species of the dark sweat bee. And then if things don't get confusing enough, you have the small dark sweat bees. There's 400 species of those. So it just goes on and on like that. And this is Golden Alexander up in Thatcher State Park that I found this little bee. But of course, they're all over the place. And again, most people don't even notice any of these guys either. And here's our blue orchard bee, the one that's really fast. And almost all of these native bees are fast. They fly around fast, they pollinate fast, they do their work, and then they're gone. Our honeybees are much slower in what they do. 150 species of mason bees, and so mason bees actually nest in here. There's actually a golden one, it's called the horn-faced bee, which is brought over from Japan, really to pollinate the flowers. This is a blackberry flower, but blackberries, raspberries, all of our fruit trees are all in the rose family, and these guys are great at pollinating those, especially if you're a producer of any of those types of things. But a little house like this, now you have your blue orchard bees. This is actually a bee that can be managed like honeybees, but now you can take it off your pole, and I can give it to you, and I can put blue orchard bees. So this is actually a bee that can actually be managed. You can take them, these tubes actually all come out of here, and you can break them open, and then a lot of people will put them in the refrigerator and keep them there, and then bring them out in the spring, and then they'll mail them to different people, things like that.
What are those tubes made of?
These are just paper.
Okay.
These are just made out of wax, kind of paper tubes.
Do they have to be a certain size?
Yes. For blue orchard bees, this size is 6 inches long, and the diameter that they are is designed specifically for the blue orchard bee. But you could take bamboo, put it into a bundle, and because you just cut the bamboo at the nodes, and you put those in a bundle in a tree, and they make great bee houses too. So if they're too little, some of our other bees will live in them. Also, not only that, the blue orchard bee, but there's actually solitary wasps, potter wasps, that actually use these too, and they really don't sting either. So you'll actually see some little wasps and things like that using them. So that's our, moving on, the Leafcutter Bee. Leafcutter bees are cool because they actually cut leaves. And remember how we said the mason bee is a mason bee because they use mud. Guess what? Leafcutter bee uses leaves. So they'll wrap the inside of wherever they find with leaves, and then they'll cap them off. Each of the cells will be capped off with leaves that they cut in the garden. So people often see these bees cutting their flowers and think it hurts them, but it's not really very damaging to your plants. So it's not much to be concerned about as far as the health of your plants. They don't really damage the plants. They're just using those. They carry them in their mouth, and they actually construct leaves inside of their homes. They collect pollen on their abdomen. So we've seen bees collected on their legs, bees collected inside, now bees that collect it on these hairs on the underside of their abdomen right there. And so those are leafcutter bees, and you actually, with the females, you can really kind of see that. And their tails oftentimes are kind of pointed up, which I'm sure, if people are afraid of bees, would be a good deterrent that you might get stung with this abdomen pointed up towards you. And this is in bird's foot trefoil. 140 species of the leafcutter bee. And then we have carter bees. So the leafcutter bees cut leaves. Now the carter bees, and also oftentimes known as wool carter, they actually take the leaves and they shred them. They shred them into long strips. Now they take that stuff back to their nest and they'll cap off each of their brood cells using what they have shredded. And they're actually very beautiful because they have these markings on them that remind us again of wasps, which might be a deterrent. Coloration in nature often can be deterrent, whether yellows or oranges. This bee is different because almost all male bees are always smaller than the females. Not with these guys. And the pictures are kind of backwards, but the male here is actually larger than the female bee, so just a little bit larger. So that's something different. They also collect hair on their abdomens down here. 23 species of these bees, and as you see, a lot of them 500 yards to 1 mile flying distance. And then a specialist. So you're out in your garden one day and you're enjoying July, and you look inside of your squash flowers and you'll see this bee here sticking his tongue out at you. So they have very long tongues. And they have very long tongues. So if you look at the very bottom of the flower, inside your squash flower, there's a place to stick your tongue and drink here, and there's about 2 of these holes inside the flower. So they just sit down there and they drink nectar all day long. And of course you'll see honeybees and bumblebees coming too. Squash flowers are native to North America, originally in the southwest of America. As the Native Americans spread the squash plants around the country, this bee came along with them. And there's only 13 species found in North America. It looks like a honeybee, really. It's the exact same size as a honeybee, but it will only go to squash flowers, so whether cucumbers, watermelons, zucchini, pumpkins, this will always be there. So this is important to know if you were, for example, a pumpkin farmer, and a lot of times pumpkin farmers will go and call up the guy who has the honeybee hives, and he'll pay him money to bring his hives to pollinate his pumpkins. Well, he doesn't need to spend that money, because wherever there are squash flowers, there are squash bees. And so he doesn't need to pay the honeybee guy. Because actually honeybees are kind of, the other reason they're important is because you can throw them on a truck, take them to blueberry season in Maine, pollinate there, almond time out in California, and pollinate out there, or wherever. So monocultures are actually bad because they are dependent on honeybees, and honeybees are actually, their health of the hive is actually degraded by this transportation. The honeybees are actually displaced, and so their health is actually sacrificed. So what they're trying to get farmers to do all around the country is, since we know that bees only have a range of 200 yards to a mile, create a diversity of flowers, create diversity within your monocultures even, so that you have these bees available around. Because otherwise, if you're an almond, and as far as the eye can see this way, that way, when all the almonds are in bloom, that's wonderful. But then after the almonds aren't in bloom, to a pollinator, like a bee, it becomes a desert, and there's no food anywhere to be found. And so they can't survive in those situations.
If there's a bee in one of the flowers, would another bee avoid that one?
No, they actually
They just go together.
kind of get pushy, and they'll push each other around inside the building. They don't sting each other, nothing like that.
Okay.
They just literally, like the bumblebee will push these guys out of the way, or you even see honeybees down in there, or the green sweat bee. So they'll push each other around trying to get to these pockets for nectar. The squash bee, of course, if you ever watch your squash flowers, they close during the daytime. The males will actually stay right in there until the next day, and they'll sleep inside the flowers, and the females will usually probably sleep under the ground, because they usually will dig, and their holes, some of the mining bees that we saw might only be a couple inches in the ground. These guys could dig up holes 6 inches or deeper into the ground, so even if you were to rototill your garden, things like that, you're probably not affecting these bees when you're doing it. So, I mean, of course, no-till is an option too. But, so these bees sleep right there, and then when the squash flowers are over, their life cycle is over, and so their season ends too. So, very interesting little bee. And you see the long tongue. And then sunflowers, fun to go out and see your sunflowers, because you'll see longhorn bees. Well, where did we get this name, longhorn bees? Like, where do they come up with? And I'm using all common names. Scientists use all these scientific names, and it really helps if you're really studying them. But if you're not, this is the common name. Look at these long antennae. We haven't seen them long on any other bees. These are actually male bees. Only the male bees have long antennas. The females don't. But they have these really long hairs that they're collecting pollen on. They almost look like bell-bottom pants. And they're collecting pollen there. And these guys, all the males will actually congregate inside of a flower. So here we see 2 male bees, and they'll actually sleep there at nighttime. You could actually see 4, 5, 10, 15 bees, male bees, all sleeping inside the flower. And primarily these longhorn bees like all plants in the sunflower family. So things like asters, sunflowers, they're the plants that because actually in the sunflower, it's not one flower. Each one of these little things is a flower. There's thousands of flowers, composite flowers. Same way with this here. So anything in this sunflower family actually has lots and lots and lots of flowers. Each one of those flowers obviously becomes a seed. That's our thing. And then, last but not least of the major categories of bees is called the digger bees. And digger bees, just like the mining bees, guess what? They live under the ground. And look at the tongues on these things. They have like a really, really long tongue. So they're good with flowers that have nectar that's deep down inside. And so the digger bees. And I actually didn't realize I had taken pictures of these until a few weeks ago. So, but 15 species of these in North America, only a couple species actually live here in New York State. Now, just when the world gets kind of crazy and you think that you know anything about bees, then you have cuckoo bees. You have all heard of the cuckoo bird, who goes, she lays her egg in the robin's nest, and the robin hatches the egg for the cuckoo bird. Well, guess what? These bees become lazy over time, and they go and lay their eggs in the nest of other bees. So off the female bee goes, and she's collecting all the pollen and nectar, doing all the work. She sneaks inside of her nest and actually lays the egg. So we have this bee here and this one here. What does this bee look like that we saw? Does anyone remember? The one that had to cut the leaves? This one looks like a leafcutter bee right here. But notice she has no hairs on the bottom of her abdomen. It's a little pointier. And so off goes the leafcutter bee. In she goes, lays her egg. Then the leafcutter bee caps it off with a leaf. The eggs hatch. The larva, this one, they actually can, most larvae don't move, but in the cuckoo bees, they actually move, and they'll go and kill the larva of the other bee. And then they'll eat their food and then hatch. So so they basically parallel the life cycle of those bees. So the cuckoo bees. So you might see cuckoo bees along, but notice also they don't have much hair. You know, they're sort of hairless too. And then you also have your wasps. It's just like we have, I just want to touch briefly on social wasps. Here we have a ball-faced hornet making those big nests. Those are ball-faced hornets. Paper wasps make the little honeycomb things up under your eaves. And yellow jackets will make on the eave kind of like a smaller paper one, or they'll be underground. So stay away from all those. But they only have the queen survive over the winter too. So if they built a nest in one place one year, they're not going to build it in the same place the next year. So it's not like you're going to have a perennial problem. They might be in the same locality, but not in the exact same place. Solitary wasps. all of these are kind of like very beautiful. A lot of them are potter wasps, and they actually make little mud things on the outside of your buildings. They're primarily harmless. They don't really sting because they're solitary, just like the solitary bees. They don't really bother you. So they're actually going out. They look like they're pollinating. They're just drinking nectar. So I call them accidental pollinators. And so which one is the female, which one is the male here? The male's smaller on top. Only exception is the Carpenter Bee. So now there's the threats to our bees. I kind of alluded to it earlier. We talk about the deserts. You create these huge monocultures. That's not good for pollinators, obviously, because of their flight range. So habitat fragmentation is bad. Grazing can be bad for these in areas where there's lots of grazing. Pesticide use is a big one. And the biggest one really is for us in our backyards not to use insecticides and pesticides. Or at least if you're going to use it, read the labels on those insecticides. Also, spray when the bees aren't active. For example, you could spray in the afternoon after the bees aren't active. A lot of these insecticides have a short shelf life, so they'll do their job overnight. And when the bees come out in the morning, it won't be as toxic of an area. A lot of people want perfect lawns, and so they don't want any weeds. But a lot of the weeds, like dandelions and chicory and violets and all of these plants, they're great pollinator plants, and clover, all of these things, and they're all edible. People go to the health food store to buy dandelions, which cost more pound for pound than salmon, but yet they pay how much money to kill them in your lawns? So dandelions are very nutritious.
Just two quick questions.
Yep.
I've been reading that a lot of plants that one can buy at places like Home Depot and Lowe's are already pre-treated with pesticides.
That's right, it's neonicotinoids, and they affect all of the pollinators. Lowe's and Home Depot have been put under a lot of pressure lately, and I believe now they have to label if they're pesticide free now. The real way around all of this is to go to your local nurseries and to support your local nurseries, because they will tell you what they're doing to their plants. If you don't, you can talk to them and ask them what they're doing to their plants. In most cases, they're not doing these commercially treated plants. So buying things from local places can avoid that whole problem with insecticides, because the neonicotinoids actually are within the system of the plant, and so even as a baby, they're within the body of the plant, and so when the bees come and collect the pollen, it's in the pollen. They take it back to their hives. It creates a neurological disorder. They forget where they are, where they're going, what they're doing, and so that's one of the possibilities of colony collapse disorder. Plus, we see the bees being transported all over the place. They'll actually feed honeybees corn syrup with antibiotics, which those antibiotics actually end up in the honey that you buy in the store, which will make us less likely to be treated at a doctor's office. So you should buy, and the rule of thumb is if you can buy honey locally from local sources too. So I think the key word just is low, play it safe, buy local. In the plant world, that really is a great message. So pests and diseases often affect any organism that has a weakened immune system, which if there's been pesticides used that could weaken them, make them more, because in nature, whenever everything is in balance, these never tend to be a problem. Point in case, wasps eat aphids. One time on a corn plant, it was full of aphids. Along came a wasp, which eats aphids, and about 3 days later I came and there was no more aphids left. They were all gone. But if they were an ant and they knew there was aphids there, the ants would actually farm the aphids, because aphids, when they go to the bathroom, emit their feces is a sweet honeydew, which is very good, which ants love. So they actually will protect the aphids and they'll collect the honeydew from the aphids. So ants actually will farm them, whereas wasps will actually eat them. So there are lots of things we can do. And how you can help is avoid pesticides, plant a diversity of plants. Plants that bloom from early spring all the way to the late fall. You can provide nesting boxes for the 30%. You could cut your briars and brambles. You leave your sumac that's broken, things that aren't pretty in nature, you know, having an area where there's leaves in your backyard or an open sandy area, all providing all, not only does it, if you help the bees, you're actually helping everything else in nature too. You might be helping the birds, you might be helping the animals, all these types of things. Like a forest that has a dead tree in it, a snag is great for, you know, maybe a chickadee to go into a woodpecker hole, but also might be holes left over for the bees to have their nest in it too. So sometimes having an untidy yard can actually be beneficial too, not having the perfect yard, not having the perfect lawn. So this is a few things you can plant, native plants, and I have a few handouts here too. I actually have seed packets for everybody with native plants in it that I'll give out tonight too. So plant a variety of flowers to ensure a constant bloom from early spring to fall. We've said that a few times. Remember about bees, they can't see red. So find flowers that are yellow, that are white, that are blue, and plant those. Certainly plant red flowers if you want butterflies, if you want hummingbirds, you know. So just have a diversity of flowers. Keep all these things in mind as you are planning your garden or your plants. And avoid hybridized plants. So for example, the flower that you give your loved ones at Valentine's Day. You notice there's no stamens with pollen on them. Well, it's just all petal. That's because those flowers have kind of been manipulated over time to have all petals. And whereas the apple tree, the wild rose, they have 5 white petals with lots of stamens in the center. So find flowers that are more like their original kind, that haven't been hybridized, not too much. Plant flowers in clumps. You want like a whole bunch, like a whole bunch of coneflower and a whole bunch of black-eyed Susans. You know, plant them in big bunches because the bees will actually have a little pattern as they are pollinating. They'll go around kind of in the same route every day. And so as the flowers open, they have, even though they may be a generalist, meaning they don't mind any kind of flower, they certainly have favorites that they'll have, like bee balm. Monarda is a big favorite of, plus not just bees, but hummingbird moths. Have you ever seen hummingbird moths? So Monarda, they look like hummingbirds. Their wings are flying really fast, and they have a long tongue that goes into the Monarda. They're really cool too. So you also see lots of bumblebees at the Monarda as well. Plant flowers of different shapes and different sizes and different heights. You know, because you want little flowers for little bees, you want big flowers for big bees. So all different flowers of shapes and sizes. And you don't need to know your flowers. You just need to know what colors they are. Do they smell good? Are they big flowers? Are they little flowers? You know, things like that. So, let's see, I think we covered all. Flowers that smell sweet are attracted. Birds don't smell. So a hummingbird will be attracted to a bright red flower that doesn't smell with a long tube so that its nose can get down in there. So birds don't smell, so there's no need for the flower that's attracting birds to make that smell. And if you're a fly, you don't care if your flower is beautiful as long as it stinks and attracts you. So, some spring, I just put down a few, to everything there's a season, so as you consider these plants from early spring to early fall, I wrote down just a few that would attract bees in the spring. Virginia bluebells is native. Wild geranium is that one you'll see, and maybe you'll see them in your yard. Just encourage them to kind of stay there, or in your woodlands. Trout lilies. A lot of these plants that go in the early spring, they're called spring ephemerals. And so when there's no leaves on the canopy overhead, the spring ephemerals will all come up. So it's a great time to get out in the woodlands. And notice in the summertime, there are no flowers in the woodlands because it's so shady. You'll find them along the woodland edges or in open meadows, things like that. So, consider that. Almost in the springtime, almost any flowering tree is going to attract the very first ones to bloom in the spring. Hopefully in 2 or 3 weeks, we'll see the blooms of the red maple and the pussy willows. All of these are going to be attracted to bees and other pollinators. Red maple, for example, is interesting because it produces a lot of trees in the early spring when they bloom before the leaves come out. They're actually hedge their bets. They'll be wind pollinated or insect pollinated because maybe it's too cold for the insects to come out, but you have a windy day. So let's just kind of hedge our bets. We could be wind pollinated or we could be insect pollinated. So if you do that, then it's a win-win situation for everybody, at least for the plant. Summer favorites, lupine, milkweed. Milkweed also is another big key one. We've heard about the plight of the monarch butterfly. Of course, it's attractive to bees, and there's all different kinds of milkweeds. But the monarchs had a little bit more success, I believe. Soon in March, the counts are going to come out from Mexico, but the population hopefully has come back a little bit, and there's a big push to get milkweed along the highways, because the minute those monarchs leave Mexico and they hit Texas in these agricultural areas, they need that milkweed so they can, because it's multi-generational. A group born in Texas, the next one's like in the middle belt of America, and then the ones in the north. So about 4 generations later, those are the ones that fly back to Mexico. So milkweeds are very important. Spice bush is an early blooming plant too in the forest, and spice-tail swallowtail butterflies, that's their host plant. So it's important to have the diversity. Bee balm, mint, sunflower, blanket flower, Joe Pye weed, all great. Autumn favorites, asters, ironweed, and goldenrod. Goldenrod is often thought of as this horrible weed, and it'll make you sneeze and things like that. Actually, it's not really the pollen of the goldenrod that's making you sneeze. I forget which pollen it was, but there's another plant that blooms at the same time as goldenrod. So the goldenrod is a favorite, and so just a few things to consider. And maybe you don't even need to plant these. Maybe you just need to let them grow, or or in your community somewhere. Nest boxes for the 30%. We have different nest boxes that you can produce. I brought a few here at the end. If anybody wants to purchase one, I brought a few with me. And they actually have removable tubes, so you can put new tubes back in them. So in the bumblebee houses, you can just creep. This is that area where I saw those cellophane bees and mining bees were all nest in kind of an area that looks like this sandy area here. So that's that's good habitat for bees. And here's just a list of resources and references, places that you can go. I created a website called nativebiology.com. I have handouts, and I also have seed packets I'm going to hand out. And there's a few great books that you can read if you want to learn more. This woman, Heather Holm, Pollinators of Native Plants, is a great book, because she goes through each common flowers, native flowers that you'll see, and all the different types of pollinators, including beetles and butterflies and moths that pollinate those flowers. This comes from Pollinator Partnership, which is up here. A Pollinator Partnership, Bumblebees of the eastern United States. So you can there's a few bumblebees that are probably going to go extinct in our time. One's called the rusty patched bumblebee. Very few of those are actually seen. A lot of our insects, actually, New York State's insect, which is a seven-spotted or 9-spotted ladybug. There's a citizen science. If you find those, they want to report, because those ladybugs are almost all gone due to non-native ladybugs. Attracting Native Pollinators, which is a great book from the Xerxes Society. Xerxes.org has all kinds of stuff. There's literature there on how to build bee houses and so on and so forth there. And this is a great book that they have. I'm actually developing, it's in editing now, but it's called a pocket guide to native pollinators. And it's the size of index cards, so you can put it in your pocket. This is it blown up. But on those, they'll actually have the bee in its actual size that you might see in the field, and the months that it's active, a little bit of information, plus some photos of some of the common bees that you'll actually see. So I'm actually developing that. So if you're on the list here tonight, I can let you know when that book is done. Pocket Guide to Pollinators, of Native Pollinators. So I'm going to give everyone a packet of seeds. It's here, and we'll hand those out. I also have some literature. I guess I can leave this up here if you want to just come up and grab it. But then we'll do some questions. We'll do questions first. So any questions?
Why is there all this sort of panic about honeybees not being around to pollinate when these guys do so well?
Well, I think a lot of people don't know about these bees, number one. So it's a lack of information. Because I think, how many of you came in tonight thinking honeybees were native to North America? Okay, I thought that too. That's how I started with all this. I had honeybees, and I still do have honeybees. And I think, and as a honeybee keeper and someone interested in nature and bees, I didn't know about a lot of these bees either. And I was an environmental educator and things like that. I have a degree in agriculture. They don't talk. Nobody talks about it. So that's kind of why I created native biology, to start talking about it. Start just making people aware of the world around them, of the things that are right in our backyard, the things that we just don't see, and they're there. So that's why I think a lot of hype has been to the honeybee, but then purely for a selfish reason, we like honey. You know, we like honey, and they also pollinate. So as an agricultural commodity, I think we're concerned about honeybees. So, other questions? Yep.
You mentioned colony collapse disorder?
Yep. Colony collapse disorder is, you want to know more about it? Colony collapse disorder is the phenomenon in which honeybee hives were just all dying mysteriously. In a normal winter, a certain percentage of honeybee hives will die. But all of a sudden, 50, 60, 70, 80% of honeybee are dying, and only 20 to 30% should die over the course of the winter. Maybe they would die even before winter came. And the bees would be all gone. Where did they go? So people started studying, and then that's when it was the neonicotinoids insecticide that they did some studies on that, but also all the pressures that are put on honeybees in general. Farmers taking too much honey out, or treating them with insecticides and pesticides because honeybees get mites. So there's a lot in the honeybee community about developing a stronger genetic variety of honeybees. Don't treat them for mites. Find bees that naturally take the mites off of each other. If they survive through the winter and they survive without human intervention, we're making a stronger honeybee. You know, instead of weakening them by every time they get sick, giving them antibiotics, giving them treatment for mites. So it was a lot of pressure, transporting them all around the country, plus the insecticides. And all of that, multiple things, was weakening them, and we're finding that they were dying.
So that's just honeybees, not the...
They found that it was actually being transmitted to bumblebees too, because bumblebees are pollinating on the same flowers, doing the same thing. So bumblebees were, and they think that insecticides is a big thing, while some of our bumblebee species are disappearing. There are some species that are still around, a common eastern bumblebee, for example. Other questions?
Would you say that intensively planting, even in your own property, clusters of beneficial multi-season bloom plantings would be an effective way to, even on a small scale, create a microhabitat to keep them going?
Yes, because they have such small range that your backyard can be the whole world to some of these smaller bees. So yes, your backyards, they may never, if depending on the size of your backyard, they may never leave your backyard. So you certainly, this is an area where you can have a direct impact on something, and call it one backyard at a time. So.
That was a really good question. But if we do everything right for our bee population, and our neighbor is, I have a neighbor who's spraying constantly. So how does that impact my environment?
Well, I think we can set examples for our neighbors. They start seeing like we're having positive impacts, and we, you know, educating our neighbors and letting them know maybe what they're doing, you know, is having a direct impact on your backyard. Maybe it's hard because people don't like to be told what to do. So
it's
some
church, so it's,
okay.
you know, it's, and I've wondered how to approach them about this.
Oh, so it's a church, so it's a community of people, so maybe they would be more receptive then. Maybe just give them some, start out by giving them some literature or something, and that would be a good start, perhaps.
Okay.
Or I could go there and talk to them. If it's a church.
That sounds good.
So other questions?
Do you know if there's any major, or even not major, organized effort to actually plant lots of native plants like you were referring to around farms or highways, or it seems like that's what really needs to happen.
There is, like New York State has, what's it called? It's called, there's little signs, little flower signs, and the Poughkeepsie, we have an area, and I went, and a lot of the photographs are from an area that the highway department actually planted. And actually all up and down the Taconic Parkway, there's actually areas where there are no mow zones, and they actually have planted flowers. So yeah, New York State has done a lot with that, and I think that is growing, and I was reading literature from other states too, to create these, Maryland is a classic example of beautifying of flowers on their highways. But I can't remember the name of the program. I looked it up, there's not a lot of literature on it, there's just these signs. and then you go to the highway department and you don't see much. So I think, certainly different community garden clubs, I think, could plant in areas or reach out to the highway departments to plant along roadsides. But I found thousands of pollinators, and it was a beautiful area, and I was actually taking pictures, and cars are zooming by. They don't even see me among all the flowers that are there, and no one even looks over there. So nobody even notices you. You could be on the highway, no one sees you.
And you don't think exhaust from the cars would be problematic?
It didn't appear to be in this situation, or even along the Taconic. I think due to emission controls, we're probably along a better path. Here, take your seed packet before you leave.
I'm so sorry.
So here you go.
I have.
Take that with you.
Thank you so much.
All right, yeah, if you have to go, come up and grab a seed packet. These are native plants. Actually, I have a list of the plants right here that you can take, plus you can go to the website, and I put them on there this morning. That's just a list of plants, but these are the ones that are in your seed packet. And this is just an article on, take one of these too. Thank you so much.
What do you say the website? What is the website?
nativebiology.com.
Okay.